Hello, and welcome to the Theological Family Ministry Podcast, a podcast for parents as well as children and youth ministry leaders. We are dedicated to showing how theological study and biblical application relate to the discipleship of children and youth. As always, we're hosted by Pastor Ben Palaz, the pastor of family and children's discipleship at Curtis Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, and Tony Trusoni, the family and student pastor at Faith Family Church in Finksburg, Maryland.
This is part 2 of a 2-part interview with Child Evangelism Fellowship Local Director for Carroll County, Maryland, Stephen Davis. That episode was posted last week, so if you missed it, you want to go back and listen as we cover the ministry of CEF in general, how Stephen came to be involved, and the need for evangelism with children in general.
But when we talk about evangelizing children, I want to ask, how is sharing the gospel with children than sharing it with adults? Is it pretty much the same thing? Do you want to kind of give a Ravi Zacharias level discourse to children, especially infants, I assume?
Yeah. Children, yes, are some of the most thinking among us, but I wouldn't say that we would enter on that, the collegiate academic level. Sharing the gospel, how is it different from doing it with adults? One, they're usually smaller, but in reality, it is and it isn't that different. There's a pithy little line that, CF workers sometimes use, and they'll say, all evangelism is child evangelism. And in its context, it's true. Jesus himself said, unless you become like a child, you cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. So basically, in order to respond to the gospel and to hear, effective evangelism, you need a childlike disposition. Now, we do make a distinction between people being childish and childlike. The scriptures encourage people being childlike as opposed to childish, which the Apostle Paul talked about. When I was a child, I thought like a child, acted like a child, but now that I'm older, I put away these childish things. But Jesus does call us indeed become childlike. The unique thing about ministering to children versus adults is that people come into this world sinful yet believing. We have to be taught to doubt, either by deliberate instruction, somebody call it critical thinking, or by constant letdowns and disappointments. Children are by nature going to have less trouble believing, but as life goes on, people become more and more calloused. I think those are the, initial differences I would observe between working with adults and working with children. Children do come believing. It behooves us then to make the most of that before they become calloused, and to give them truth rather than wait until they've become hardened and they've given themselves over to a whole lot of things they shouldn't be. And, I gotta be careful here, but there's a church not too far from here. I love them. They really mean well, and they do really great work. But they had someone stand in for their children's ministry on Christmas, for the children's Christmas service, and do like a little children's message. And so again, no names mentioned here, but the instructor, the teacher, she went on to tell the children that boys and girls, just like, we don't see Santa put the presents under the tree, so we also don't see Jesus, and just really tried to make a correlation of faith. Now, again, I know she really meant well, but, when they find out that, hey, Santa really isn't putting presents under your tree, it's mom and dad or somebody else altogether, well then, hey, where's this Jesus guy too? I guess he ain't it. And I actually had somebody, tell me that, who was a noted rock musician, and he actually lost his faith in God because he said, well, great, Santa's not real. I guess Jesus ain't either. And that was part of his testimony. Pretty neat guy. But that aside, why should we let our young people go on to believe so many falsehoods, letdowns, disappointments, and even bad ideas? I'm not totally criticizing Christmas or Santa Claus. I think the historical figure was amazing. In fact, this Christmas, actually even last Christmas, my kids, when they would be asked, my oldest Silas, he's a little sharper now, he reads a lot, but he's turning 8 tomorrow, so shout out to Silas. but he last year, he'd have people ask him, so hey, you believe in Santa Claus and you're looking forward to Christmas bringing you presents? And basically the answer he learned to give was, well, yeah, I kind of believe in Santa, but more importantly, do you know who Santa believed in? Because the original Saint Nick, right? From now Turkey, he actually in year 325 was one of the signers of the Nicene Creed. And so it's more important than who do you believe in Santa? It's who did Santa believe in? Because he believed in God the Father, Almighty Maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, His only begotten Son. So it's pretty amazing just to I think know that kids can understand important truth and not let them be dissuaded by letdowns, disappointments, so that later in life, when they do have the opportunity to hear the truth, they don't believe it. They dismiss it as another fairy tale or anything else because, hey, they've been lied to all along.
Good things to consider. So, Stephen, what are some unhelpful things that we might do? I mean, so you mentioned some things there. Anything else that may be unhelpful when we're sharing the gospel with kids?
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things, and I want to be careful to not just focus on the negative, but also the positive. And I know you guys mind that as well. But I think one thing initially is false assurance.
Yes.
Raise your hand. Just repeat this prayer for me. Things like that.
Write a date in a book. Right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's. I think that's really a really troubling thing that's not ultimately helpful because. It can really backfire in a number of directions. For instance, in the media recently, I'm sure you guys have seen it, but I guess that and maybe you'll have her on sometime. But Lady Gaga, she's.
I've already sent the email.
All right, great.
We're just working on dates, I think.
But she's right. She's a Christian, she says. So somebody gave her some sort of assurance somewhere along the way that I don't know where or how it happened. But but when we look for fruit, I'm a little concerned because as I've had in discussions with others along the way, Jesus not only answered Nicodemus, but he also answered Lady Gaga 2,000 years ago, saying that we're born that way, but we need to be born again. So I certainly am concerned with, false assurance. I think being insincere, kids, adults too, of course, everybody, I think generally, and I think many of us can relate with this, but, kids also can really sniff out, insincerity, if you're not really there and if you're not really caring and if you don't really believe what you're saying. So I think being insincere is another thing to be aware of. False assurance, being insincere. You may not be the best children's minister, but if you're at least sincere and you're really there because you care and you love them, and I don't just mean like well-wishing. I know the lady was very sincere in, talking about Santa Claus leaving presents. But the fact is, beyond that, these kids are going to remember that she cared about them enough to spend that, Christmas morning with them. So I think as long as you're a believer and you do have at least pretty good theology, being sincere is really important. Doing kids ministry out of mere obligation just isn't going to cut it. Sometimes, this may result from indifference. People may not really want to get on their level and meet kids where they're at. So again, kids can sniff out authenticity. Adversely, some are just, some folks are very sincere and authentic. They're maybe overzealous, maybe just really fluffy, warm, fuzzy, fun-driven, and just oversimplified, and they miss some really great teaching moments. And I would really caution against that too, because church, Sunday school, children's church, Good News Club, children's Bible ministry workers, everybody who's Awana, everybody who works in children's ministry, it's pertinent to all of us. That it's certainly much, much more than just having a really good, fun time. As important as that is, that the fun of it, the charisma of it may be a vehicle that open these kids up, but it can never be just that. We don't want to miss some really great opportunities to teach the good news. I think another danger that's everywhere, it's pervasive in culture, but specific to children's ministry also, is that it can become more humanistic than biblically true and God-orientated. Kids can learn and understand things beyond, animals boarding, the ark in pairs. They can sing and then sing a fun song about it while coloring a picture. But, in a cartoonist event. But, I I've heard kids literally rattle off, rap song after rap song, or you could sing the Frozen lyrics forwards and backwards, and recite, paragraphs of, movie script lines. And yet, and of course it starts off with, parroting, rote memory. But we also have to start somewhere and give children a true and basic framework, to build a saving knowledge of further understanding. My son, who, I have 4 children, but my son, for instance, my son, for instance, is, he's come a long way, but he started out, I literally at like a year and a half, maybe even younger than that, would just read him. I would read him the Bible in bed at night, and just straight. I mean, I think at the time it was the 1984 version, NIV. But I literally just read the Gospels with him, and to be honest, he literally, after about 6 months of doing that, we read through the 4 Gospels 3 different times before he was 2 years old. And I think around just before 2 years old, he could literally count, I think what Luke goes up to 20, or I guess Matthew 28. But he literally could count just beyond 30, because I would start with the chapters and the verses, and he learned his numbers literally in the New Testament. And then he started recognizing, at the same time he learned to speak, he also learned to read or identify the words Holy Bible. He'd even say things like New International Version, or Matthew. He could read the names Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Jesus, God, before he was 2 years old. And it's, again, I'm not trying to brag. Not all of our children were able to do that, and nor was I able to spend all that kind of time with our other children, because one, with your first, you're able to have more time with them. Mm-hmm. But I'm just using that as an example that even though he didn't understand what I was reading to him, later in life, when he hears that name Jesus again, or when he hears that same story and he hears certain words again, he'll begin to understand, oh, that's what that means. Oh, that's what, I've heard that word in this context, in that context, and now he'll start piecing it together. So I think, again, I don't want to encourage people to go way over their heads, but kids can really learn and identify much more than we give them credit for, and they will mature and they will begin to connect it to broader concepts, and it become more concrete, and they'll be able to have to actually even not only be able to understand it themselves, but even one day be able to teach it. In fact, my son actually has taught others. I've literally heard him, just in candid conversation, say some things that I did not know he knew, like just blew me away. I just, it's very rewarding. Of course, he still needs to be parented. He still needs to be raised and matured and disciplined at times. But it's amazing that I'm actually starting to see fruit in his life, which is really, really exciting. I get it. Working with kids, can be hard. It can be inconvenient. We all give ourselves to that which, we deem worthwhile, be it academic goals, career goals, hobbies, games, gym memberships. But I think, even being a maverick on YouTube. But I think one of the most, I think one of the most worthwhile things that we can ever give ourselves to is to help raise up a godly generation. So ultimately, right, what's it say? Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do for the glory of God. So I really am convinced that, we really are, it's time well spent to invest in the next generation.
That's good. Now I want to ask, we kind of heard some of the unhelpful ways that we tend to do it, and we do tend to have to battle against some of those. Yeah. But what are some specific helpful ways to approach sharing the gospel with kids, and beyond just saying do it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is unhelpful when we marginalize or diminish or treat children, or children's ministry as, something that's passé or not, really a relevant priority. But, I think really, we need to, just look for ways that we can be incarnational, with the children, even show, again, like I mentioned before, being authentic and not being, inauthentic is huge. I think investing, I mentioned that passage in Lamentations 2:19, right? I think if you're really praying and interceding for these boys and girls, you're going to, your heart's going to be there. And when you have time with them, and even when you're not with them, you're interceding for them. And so, none can come to the Father unless, our Lord draws them. So one, we need to be interceding for them. I think that's a huge, helpful, and foundational part. Something you'll notice if anyone has or is involved with CEF, but as you learn the culture points of Child Evangelism Fellowship, this ministry is really built